Oh, I was muted. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Educated Collins Snap channel. How you doing? So today we're going to be doing a follow-up of a previous video. We did the Token Shop Series 3 guide. Now we're going to be following up with the Series 4, Series 5 guide. I know a lot of you guys have been trying to figure out what you want to buy. I think I have a pretty good tier list for you, so let's get into it. So I do want to say that there are some caveats here in terms of the tier list. Obviously, some cards are synergistic with other cards, and if you don't have, like Darkhawk, for example, the Zabu isn't going to be strong. So obviously, hopefully I cover a lot of these things while we go, but just keep in mind, it's not a blindly, oh, this is at the top, I should buy this. There are some constraints that we'll be going over. But I do have the top tier worth getting early tier in my opinion, and that's going to be Zabu, Galactus, Stature. Now I want to also say that you really don't need any card here right now in this meta to fully climb, except for maybe Sarah if you have nothing else. But if you have a good deck with Zabu already, there's no need to make a Galactus deck. If you have a good deck with Stature, that you don't have to buy Thanos or Kang or anything. If you have a deck that works, you don't have to experiment. This is really for the people that are needing a piece and they don't know exactly what to spend their tokens on. They're like, ooh, should I get this or should I wait? Should I get that? That kind of thing. So I definitely want to reiterate that I'm not telling you to spend, 12,000 tokens getting the 3 cards at the top and then be screwed. Right, like definitely you want to save for high evolutionary and whatnot. So just be aware that if these are cards you're already thinking about, I'm giving you like the okay that it's probably fine to spend here, and also wait for them to come up as well so that you can hear my thoughts on those cards specifically. But I just want to be careful because you can definitely look at this and then just like spend all of your tokens and then not have any left over for anything coming up. And that's not what I want. I just want you to say, oh, maybe there's one card in here that I really want to get. Where does it stack up on the list? Oh, okay, this is their reason. This is my reasonings. Do I agree with it? Then follow through. So I'm not telling you to spend on just the top and then ignore everything below it or anything like that. I'd really say at best get one card or 0 depending on how much your token budget is, and then see if it makes sense from there, because you really don't have to buy anything. So I know I'm spending a lot on this, but I just want to be careful that people aren't just wasting their money on the Galactus when they already have a good Thanos deck or something like that. So I just want to be careful. And since these aren't a lot of cards, I'm hoping to go over them, all of them one by one. So hopefully that'll be good. But the worth getting early tier is these cards are very strong right now, and they're not getting dropped soon. So they've either been dropped recently or they don't drop at all. So because of that, I think if you really want to play a deck with that particular card, it might be worth spending. Usually it's going to be 3,000 tokens, or with the big bad, the 6,000 to get them in your collection. So first we have Zabu. This card is really strong in the meta right now. Works with the popular Jeff Stature decks, works with any Darkhawk decks, works with Sarah decks. So there's a lot of really powerful decks that Zabu works with. And it's not getting dropped down for around 2 months, which is a long time to play without a meta card. So I think it's in that position, especially if you have Darkhawk, where you can consider getting it early. So that's what it means. This card, it's not necessary, but if you are considering, hey, get Zabu, I would say if you have all the requirements, yeah, that's fine. Now Galactus. Now this is the only card in here of the big bads that is like a tier above. And the reason for this is I think right now, people are going to hate me, this card is the best big bad statistically in terms of like how much winning it does and play rates and everything. I would say this one just shines a little bit above Thanos and Kang. Not saying they're bad. Those are also strong cards. But I think there's like a noticeable gap between Thanos, Kang, and Galactus in this particular meta that can change soon. And I know there's some Galactus haters in here. They're gonna be like, "Well, how can you recommend?" But I'm just telling the truth here. In my opinion, I think Galactus is a little bit above. So if you are a fan of Galactus and that's the big bad you want to invest in, usually people are investing in one of the big bads and then like figuring out what they want to go from there. I would say Galactus is fine. Now, Thanos and Kang, we're going to talk about, are also fine, but I wanted to have a distinction because I felt it was necessary. And then next up, we have Stature. So this one is one that recently dropped down to 3,000 gold, and there's a new deck, a new meta deck with it. It's using Jeff and Stature. You can also do things without Jeff, but you do need Stature. If you don't have Stature, the deck breaks down completely. So Stature is the key piece. The other cards can kind of be built around. You do need like maybe a discard engine with Black Bolt or Moon Knight, but without Stature, you can't even run the deck. So it just got dropped down. So if you wanted to wait for it to be free or be Series 3, you're going to be waiting 3 months, which is quite a long time to wait for you to get this. I'm absolutely sure the meta will be completely different by then, and Stature will not be the dominant powerhouse it is in this particular meta. So if you were waiting and Stature is like the only card you need to really complete that deck list or make a viable variant of that deck list, then it might be okay to get Stature early, spend those 3,000 tokens, and then play with the deck. It's really popular right now. It's really powerful right now. So you can definitely take advantage of that and utilize it to your benefit. So I would say those are the three that I would say in some circumstances are a little bit better, worth getting early in some cases. Let's move on. Now, this next tier is the baseline tier, essentially. Just powerful, strong cards that I think are pretty good. Not necessarily saying you have to get these, but I think they're good enough to stand on their own and is a pretty powerful tool. So we have the two big bads, Thanos and Kang. So Thanos has been a consistent part of the metagame for a long time. Very strong combo. Did get nerfed with the Lockjaw changes. Did get nerfed with the Space Stone changes, with the Quinja changes. But still has a lot of good tools. I see a lot of people still playing Thanos, especially at the higher MMR ends and Infinite. And they do really well with it. So I think it's definitely a good tool, a good card, very powerful card, flexible card, lots of options. And I do recommend it is one of the decks you at least try because there's a lot to learn by playing Thanos in this game. So definitely think it's a powerful, strong card. Kang is definitely more niche. It's the niche, the most unused out of the three, but it does have a lot of good stats backing it. I would say maybe its win rate isn't necessarily the best because you are losing a card, but its cube rate is pretty high because you have the ability to blind snap and just fake your opponents out to having this particular Kang option that they're not going to know until you play it. So you have the ability to really just surprise them and get that free snaps a lot in a lot of games that can give you free cubes. So you might not have the best win rate, but you probably will have a really good cube rate playing Kang. Now, obviously, Kang makes your game slower because you have to play extra turns, and those are usually the longest turns that you're playing. So it definitely slows down your cube per minute, but it might increase your cube per game. So definitely an interesting card. I'm still not the biggest fan of it being in the game. I don't like the ability of you to snap with impunity, which is usually what Kang allows you to do. So personally, not the biggest fan of the card, but in terms of how it performs, it is pretty good, even though it's pretty niche. Now, Jeff is like the newcomer on the block. I've made a video about what I recommended, and I can still stand by that video in terms of it's a good card if you have a lot of tokens to spend, or it's a card you think you're going to be picking up anyways in the future. So this is a card I bought. So personally, in terms of Series 4 and 5, I think I've only bought Thanos and Jeff in terms of things I've personally bought. I do have cards like Zabu and Darkhawk because of either Season Pass or whatnot. But In terms of spending 6,000 tokens to get a card, I did commit to Jeff because I thought it was a card I'm going to be using in the next 3 months before it drops down to 3,000 gold, where maybe it's a lot more attractive of a deal. So I've been happy with my purchase so far. I think it's been a very strong card. So it's a card if you think you're going to be using in the next 3 months, feel free to pick up. But obviously these cards are expensive, so you don't want to be blindly picking up a card that you might not even like down the road. So just be careful. But I do think it has stood up to the metagame, stood up to deck building, and it's just put in a lot of decks that tend to do well. Now, next up, we have the worth but dropping soon tier. So these cards I think are pretty good, pretty strong. They are just dropping this month. So you're going to be able to get these for either 1,000 tokens or free in a couple of weeks. And I think that is enough of a wait time that I would not recommend getting these cards. So they are strong, they're powerful, but because of they're dropping the Series 3 so soon, I would just say just wait those extra weeks and then you can get them for a lot cheaper. Now, if you are new to Series 3, it's different for you. So if you're new to Series 3 and you have a ton of Series 3s, like 50 plus, 40 plus to get, then once they drop to Series 3, they actually become harder to get because you're not going to be able to pick them up in the rotation. You either have to make sure that Darkhawk is a card or one of these is a card you pin, and then once it drops down to pool 3, it'll still be pinned and you can get it for 1,000. So that's happened in this season. So that's something you can do. However, most likely you're going to not have that in your rotation, and then it's going to go to the Series 3 pool. It's going to be significantly harder to get, and there's going to be other Series 3s you're going to want to use your free unlock on. So if you are newer in Series 3, you might actually want to be picking these up a little bit earlier, or at least pinning them so that you can get one of these cards at a discounted rate. Now, Darkhawk, very, very strong card in a lot of meta decks. This would definitely be worth getting early tier if it wasn't dropping soon. So this card I would say is the best of the 3 that are dropping, but it is dropping. So once it is Series 3, you can get it for free. But if you are in that new Series 3 player with a lot of Series 3s to go, you might want to pick it up or at least pin it so you can get it earlier or a cheaper rate. Now, Silver Surfer and Knull, these cards are just consistent cards. I presently surprised by Silver Surfer's performance. It's been doing very well in the meta and just has a lot of good options. I think Goose has helped it a lot, and just the ability of having that consistent power game with the broods and whatever. It's just been a very strong card. So definitely a card I think is worth, but once again also dropping, so definitely decide to pin it or something. And then Knull honestly is carried by Galactus in terms of stats, but it is still a good card. You can play it in destroy decks and destroyers and whatnot. I've also seen it played in what's the deck? In Thanos destroyed lists. That has also been a pretty pleasant surprise to see it in there as well. So there's a lot you can do with the deck with the card that you have to be aware of. And if you do that, I think Knull is a good option. So definitely something to consider. And then next on the tier list, we do have the worth but unreleased cards. So these cards I think will be good, will probably be purchased, but I am making this video before they've been officially released. But I do want to talk about them. I do think they have some potential to be very strong. So the 2 I have here is High Evolutionary and Iron Lad. I think High Evolutionary and Iron Lad are just going to be pretty meta cards. I think Iron Lad fits into like that Zabu Darkhawk meta. There's a lot of cards you can copy in there. Not Zabu, but Rock Slide and Darkhawk, and even Dino can be like copyable targets. So I think there's just a lot of things you can do with an Iron Lad, even without the Howard. So definitely a big fan of this. You can also make some decks with it. Anything like Iron Man. There's a lot of cards you can copy, so I just think this is going to be a pretty good card. And High Evolutionary, I think, has potential to be a crazy card. You're basically getting 8 cards, 7 cards with this one card. It's going to open up a lot of deck building, a lot of deck design. Definitely think it's a card that's worth it in the game, so definitely will put that in there. And then Kitty Pryde, everyone's getting for free, so I think it's going to be good, though. It's just not something you'd spend your tokens on since everyone's getting for free, but since it's coming this season, I definitely wanted to put it in the tier list. But since it's going to be given out, it doesn't really fit in any of the tier list, so I just put it in the unreleased section. But I think it's going to be strong. I think it's going to be good. It seems like a good counter to Nebula as well. So Nebula right now is running amok, in my opinion, in terms of the highest win rate decks. So this could be something to help mitigate that potential. Now, next up, we have the would rather you wait for these, but these are acceptable. So these are like the last acceptable level, I would say, of cards that you can get. So I think these cards are all strong cards, potentially, but they aren't necessarily good enough that I would say, hey, just get these, no questions asked, where some of the other cards above them might be in that question. So we have M.O.D.O.K, Sauron, Sentry, and the Living Tribunal. So I know the Living Tribunal is not out, but I think this card is a little bit more memey than Iron Lad and High Evolutionary, and you're going to struggle a little bit to have that consistent power with a Tribunal. So I would rather you wait and really see if this is going to be a meta card, so that's why it's in here compared to something like the High Evolutionary. Now, M.O.D.O.K, I think, is definitely a very good card, one of the best pieces for discard. It's just not necessarily that critical that you get it early, and there's a lot of things you can do with this card, even though I would say M.O.D.O.K could definitely break like into like Silver Surfer territory. Its stats aren't as good as something like a Silver Surfer, so I would just say, even though if you really love discard decks, I would say okay, you can get it, but I'm fine with you waiting until later to pick it up, or waiting until a different meta where it just makes more sense. So still think it's acceptable, but you just have to be careful. And then Sauron is a good card. It's just not super necessary in a lot of decks. A lot of decks that do well don't necessarily have to run Sauron. Sauron's a pretty niche card. Same thing with Sentry. That's like they're both problems. They have good stats-ish, but they're more niche. Sentry isn't as niche as maybe Sauron is, but its stats aren't as good as Sauron, so that's kind of why they're both together. But those are two. Sentry is really cool, really fun. I definitely think the buff helped it out a lot. Going from 8 power to 10 power actually was pretty good. And even the negative 10 power can be vipered. So there's actually a lot of potential with this card to do a lot of damage. So definitely think it got better. It used to be at the very bottom of the tier list. Now I don't think it's in that position. So definitely a good buff, acceptable that it's in the playability range. So definitely like to see those type of buffs in the game, and hopefully we get more of those. But overall, even though I wouldn't mind if you get those 4 cards, I would just say be more careful. It's not as ubiquitously like I'm okay with as the top 6 essentially. Now, after this point, I would say be careful with these purchases. So these ones I don't really recommend in some way, some fashion. I just wouldn't really give you the go ahead for the next one. So these ones, I think these cards are decent cards, but they're just not worth the tokens you buy them for. So Shadow King, strong card in Silver Surfer decks especially, but it's not a card I would say is worth spending tokens on, even though it has a niche deck that it performs, and it can be better as more cards like Nebula is really in the game and Kitty Pryde in the game. You can definitely see it making more of a resurgence, but I just don't think it's worth it. 3,000 tokens is a card you might play with and get bored with, and then you've wasted the tokens. That's kind of how I feel with all the cards here. Howard the Duck, I just don't think is worth the tokens as well. So obviously these cards are unreleased, so I might be wrong, but my personal opinion is there's definitely better use cases, because anytime for a month you're kind of comparing the card with all the other cards in that month because you only have a set number of tokens to get, and I just don't think Howard is the one you want to be spending your tokens on instead of like Iron Lad or High Evolutionary or even the Tribunal. So that's why it's near the bottom. And then Master Mold and Negasonic kind of have the two same problems. They're just not played, even though they're decent. They just don't see a lot of play rate, so their stats aren't super reliable or consistent. So there are some decks that you can play Master Mode with, but I would just say it's a deck. It's a card that needs like another synergistic card to play with, and then maybe it jumps in the limelight. But right now, that's really not the case. So I'm really not super sold on the Master Mode synergy. Same thing with Negasonic. It's just not seen. You can definitely play destroy decks without it or control decks without it. You really don't need the Negasonic to really be your win condition or anything like that. It does have those niche situations, but that was more during the Shuri meta, and now you don't really see it doing too much damage. So it's not a bad card. It's just a little bit too niche right now for it to be something I can fully recommend to people to buy. And then the last tier is the unfortunate. I don't think these cards are good tier still. So yeah, we had Shanna getting buffed, but I don't think it did enough. I do have these ordered in terms of best to worst, but in the tiers they're all the kind of same. But it moved up a little bit in my opinion of Shanna, but just not enough. There's still too much RNG there. I have seen some decks that play Shanna, but they're not as good as any of the other decks, right? Like they could win. They're decks that can win. But would you play it over Darkhawk? No. Would I play it over Stature? No. Would I play it over M.O.D.O.K? Surf? No, I wouldn't. So I just don't have faith in that card really being worth your tokens, in my opinion. And the others are also in that very similar boat. Stegron, people have been trying to have it do good, but I think it needs either a stat buff or a cost reduction for it to be very useful. So I'm not a big fan of it. So yet, obviously, things can change. Snowguard and Ghost are just one drops that really don't feel very impactful in the game right now. So it's definitely not good. And right now, a lot of people are running Killmonger because of Nebula. So you're just opening yourself up to that. It's really not that great. And Dazzler has really just been a weird spot for the longest time. It's just hard to make a deck where you fill everything and also you're not just completely vulnerable to Killmonger, right? Like most of the bottom cards are just vulnerable to Killmonger, for being honest. So it just, because of Nebula, it just has this glaring weakness for all these cards that just make them very hard to play. So I just don't recommend any of those cards at the bottom. So overall, that is the tier list. I'll try to make a much overarching look at it. So if you want to see all of them at once, you have something like this. So this is the tier. We have the Zabu Galactus Stature, but just once again, be careful. Listen to the explanations and why they're there, and I hope that will kind of help you guide on what you want to pick up. Now, don't buy everything. Obviously, there's a lot of good cards. High Evolutionary coming out, Iron Lad coming out, and even in the next month, there's also some coming out that are pretty interesting. I haven't really talked about that yet, but those are pretty cool cards as well. So definitely think, as long as you're being aware and careful, you can make some good purchases. So hopefully this helped the people that need it, and take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.